Hello and welcome to the design thinking session. This session itself, we're going to be looking at ideation. And let's get to the learning objectives for today's session. There are two parts to today's session. One is how can we get better at brainstorming, and the other learning objective is how can we increase our chances of coming up with potentially breakthrough ideas. Now, with these two learning objectives in mind, before we get into that, let's do a quick recap of the design thinking process. Now, as you know, the design thinking process starts off with the challenges, and this is the part where you effectively identify the design challenge. So by identifying the design challenge, what you do is you look at the problem or desire that you want to have resolved. And once you have identified the problem or desire, the next step is to reframe it with the end user in mind. And then the third step is then to recraft it in the form of an inquiry or in the form of a question. So that is the challenges phase in the design thinking process, the first part. After that, we go on to the second part, which is learning. And this learning phase, this is where you go into deep dive into learning about the challenge. Now, this is where some of you would have gone on to have conducted surveys, or you would have collected feedback or inputs from either your colleagues or the people that you're working with, for example, your students. Additionally, I understand that some of you would have gone ahead and did some experiments, a small group experiment to kind of collect data from there. So in this phase itself, essentially is to better understand the problem that your students are facing. And so with that, you come up with a list of data and information that you could help you in the downstream process of the design thinking process itself. Now, once we've done the learning phase, the next step essentially is to look at ideation, which is what today's session is all about. There are two parts to the ideation. The first part is synthesis, and the second part is brainstorming. So we're going to get into a bit more detail in the later part of this video. Once you're done with ideation, the next phase is to go into prototype. And this is where you look at what are the best ideas and using a technique like storyboarding to kind of help you build your prototype. Once you've done that, the next and the last phase is the share and skill phase. This is where you share it with the end users or with the people who are you're implementing the solutions for. At the same time, once you've done that, you collect data and information to kind of build up or to improve on your prototype, and finally to have a solution which you could scale up. Okay, so this effectively is the design thinking process. So it spells out CLIPS, CLIPS, as we previously mentioned. So this is the design thinking process. So focusing on the ideation phase today, in the ideation phase, like I mentioned, there are two parts. The first part is the synthesis. And during the synthesis phase, effectively, there are three things that you want to do. One is you really want to look at how you can download the learnings from the learning phase, what you have learned, the data and information. After that, you want to go about looking at the different themes and insights, from all this data information that you have collected. And then the third part is to craft the how might we questions. So we're going to get into a bit more detail later on, as in each of these specific steps, what you're supposed to do. Once you've done the synthesis, the next part is going into brainstorming. Now, as I mentioned previously, that brainstorming, there are the ways of doing brainstorming and there are ways of doing brainstorming. What I mean by that is that there are good brainstorming methods and there are not so good brainstorming methods. Today, we want to get into a bit more detail in terms of what are some good brainstorming methods so that you can come up with potentially breakthrough ideas. So we're going to go through some ground rules of brainstorming, as well as we're going to introduce to you a method called a third method. Yeah, this is a method that will help you in coming out with better ideas when you are doing the brainstorming. Okay, with that in mind, let's go into synthesis.